I'm Erica Lukes, host of UFO Classified. For me, life isn't simply black and white. Life is full of many unknowns. It is my goal to travel the world and to work with the world's leading experts in the hopes of making groundbreaking discoveries. Join me on UFO Classified Friday nights at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, only on KCOR.
UFO Classified. UFO Classified. No more plausible deniability. Fact, fiction, or the truth. You decide. And now, the new voice of the high desert, the hostess of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes.
Good evening and happy Fantopia Friday. I'm Erica Lukes here on my favorite night of the week, Friday night. I love hanging out with all of my listeners who are actually very thoughtful and dedicated, intelligent people who have a vested interest in finding the truth, whatever that means. As you know, with my some research and things that I've come forward with over the past few years with regard to MUFON and with regard to the discoveries of Skinwalker Ranch and some of these things, it's been a wild ride that has challenged the typical belief systems of people, and definitely for me to speak out about my feelings on To the Stars Academy has also elicited some lovely responses from trolls, but bring it on, because at the end of the day, you're either dumber than a stump or you're bought and paid for by that team. So good luck to you. But needless to say, we do need to look cautiously into this. I have been very lucky over the past few years because I have started to collect a wonderful archive. Keith Chester, who's been on my show before, was the first person to send in his collection to me. He knew that I was really interested in research, and he understood that I wasn't going anywhere. And then Fran Ridge, I met Barry Greenwood, who has been very helpful. Jan Aldrich, I have an amazing, and Jim Klotz. I have a beautiful collection, and every day I go there and I stand in front of all of these magazines and articles and research paper that dates back to the late 40s. And I pick something out and I learn something new, or I put another piece of the puzzle into all of this. And things, as I step back, are starting to make sense. So for me, what I am seeing now is a fact that the subject matter since the Ken Arnold days it's been very interesting, because when you start to look back at some of these old magazines, newsletters, you see that there are some interesting ideas that go along with this. I'm looking at an issue of Flying Saucers, the magazine of Space Conquest from December 1959. And what do we have on here? Admiral Byrd's Weird Flight into an Unknown Land. Something that's been promoted time and time again, and unfortunately we're seeing a resurgence of that. Polar exploration proves saucers from this Earth. Okay. And then we have Search magazine from 1961, Russia's Conquest of the Mind. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that something that we've been looking into for quite some time? Just ask Hal Putoff, Kit Green. And then we have Beyond magazine from February of 1969, and it has a picture of astronauts there, and it says, facts indicate astronauts are brainwashed by unknown forces from outer space. Okay, then. And then it has, do animals have ESP and UFOs paralyze Latin America? Sounds good to me. And then another title from Beyond the magazine, Scientist Mystified Woman Burnt to Ashes by an Unknown Force. Or here's an article, The Man with a Radar Mind. Or UFO Aliens Probe Woman's Brain. So when you look at this decade after decade, and then you just do a little something that I love to do, is thumb through the book and see who actually is paying for advertisements. You look and you say, oh, the Rosicrucians, decade after decade. Or you look at some of these people with different political, religious ideologies that are paying for advertising space in these publications. Is there something to that? Are there people steering the narrative? Well, I would definitely say it's worth looking into, and I would definitely start looking into the backgrounds of people who are promoting the extraterrestrial hypothesis and much, much more. This is a very multi-layered and a very deep subject, and you simply just cannot take things at face value. You have to do your homework. My friend and guest this evening, my mentor, Barry Greenwood, has done wonderful things over the years, and I would say he is the world's most important archivist and historian with regard to UFOs. He has done more than any living human being in this regard, and I can't say that enough. And he's also been so helpful for me to talk to over the years and bounce ideas off of, and I love that learning process. He co-authored a book with Larry Fawcett called Clear Intent. If you don't have that, I would definitely recommend you getting that. And Barry, again, welcome to the show. I mean, I know I'm not, you mean a lot to me, and what you've done to improve my knowledge of this subject is just, I can't thank you enough.
Well, thank you for that. I'm here moldering away in social isolation while we're waiting for the virus threat to lift. And the thing that it's done, I mean, it's been entirely horrible what's been going on, but oddly, what it did for me was kept me home and forced me to address projects that I've been putting off for a long, long time. So if there's anything positive about it, that's it. But I can't think of much of anything else.
Well, but I mean, honestly, though, even if there wasn't a pandemic going on, I mean, you were glued to your computer, you're acquiring different archives and all of these things, and I don't think people understand the depth and breadth of what you've done to preserve this history, which is critically important for younger generations coming into this subject.
Well, something Albert Einstein posited at one point in his life was that with regard to the acquisition of knowledge, the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. And that's the way I've been approaching this subject for years and years. It's a huge subject. I mean, it's been written about in every form of media going, and it's been going on now for over 70 years. So if you want to start trying to understand a topic like that, you start at the beginning and just walk right through. And that's what I've been doing every day with this, trying to nail down loose ends, see what's behind stories, acquire background on reports that may or may not have been like the way they were presented publicly. So that can take decades and decades, and that's what I've been trying to do with it.
Well, I think it's important because you've got a younger generation coming into this that is they're the YouTubers and the Facebookers and all of these people, and that's where they're going to get information. And clearly, this information, now even more so than it was back, from the 40s on with the periodicals and newsletters and things, it is absolutely ripe to be manipulated by different people with nefarious agendas. And I think it is interesting to see what's, transpiring today with regard to that. People don't want to dig into the history, and they kind of dismiss it because they think what's happening now is something that has never happened before. And that's simply not the case. Every decade we've had a new revelation from some military official that the UFOs are here and we're looking into them. But it's funny that when you look back to different things back in the 50s and 60s, people involved in the military did not come out saying that they felt this was a threat. So why do you think that has changed over the decades, and now we're seeing this big agenda with the threat narrative being pushed forward?
Oh, a big difference now is that we have access to a lot more information much more quickly than we did in the past. In the 50s and 60s, there was no internet. There were barely photocopiers. You had to rely on microfilm at the local library to look at old newspapers or some magazines, certainly not everything. It was hard to find information back then. unless you knew someone who had a large collection or you were near a large library or university that had large collections of these things. But even then, 1965, when around the time I first became involved in it, I found it difficult to get to the bottom of stories except by way of the local drugstore, where they carried mass market paperbacks by the dozens, and most of them were reprinted from the 1950s. But, you stay with it for a long time, then you gradually peel away the layers of the onion, covering up where you can locate good information, and it all became evident after that. And one thing I've been trying to do is to take that information, which I was starved to find in the 60s, and help make it more available to people now by way of scanning, digitization of publications, and putting them in places where they can be accessible. That's practically an obsession now with myself, and then other people as well. Isaac Coy, a Swedish AFU organization. We're all trying to pitch in and get these things on the record and make them available to people freely. So I would say one of the big success stories of that has been with periodicals. It was very hard to find those in the past because I'm sure you've heard of garage bands. Well, a lot of UFO publications were garage zines. They were literally produced by teenagers in garages or their bedrooms and mailed out to perhaps a list of 2 people at most. And that's how news disseminated back then. There were bigger publications. There were newsstand things like the ones you had mentioned at the start of the show, Beyond, Flying Saucers, Mystic Magazine, Search. Some of those were done by Ray Palmer, who had a history of producing really wild pulp publications. He was a science fiction pulp publisher at first, but he decided to switch over to Flying Saucers. He saw potential there for a big audience, so began printing lots and lots of stories about UFO reports, beginning with Ken Arnold. And he made quite a living out of it. And the publications were widely available, even in a time when a lot of others weren't. So lots of folks made built their knowledge on what they read in newsstand magazines like Palmer's. And some of it's kind of off the wall, like you mentioned Admiral Byrd. That's an allusion to the Hollow Earth theory that Palmer was pushing for quite a period of time. He certainly enthralled the teenagers reading about it, but anyone with a knowledge of Arctic explorations would laugh at it and think it was ridiculous. I don't recall any stories from legitimate sources about Admiral Byrd passing into an inner hole at the Arctic that leads to the Earth inside in a central sun where civilization apparently lived. It was good reading, but weird.
And so this is an interesting point. I just want to throw this in there. From my recollection, Chris Marks, who had time to go to the Bigelow Library, was telling me that there were lots of publications in the library with regard to Antarctica and some of these things, which I find fascinating that these myths would be so exciting to someone.
Yeah, there's one thing. At the beginning of the lockdown for the virus, one of the first things I started working on was a sudden free few weeks at a Swedish archive online. It had many newspapers available. I didn't know about it until someone sent me a link to it, and I started to look, and I was astonished as to how much information there was, how many newspapers were actually reproduced. Well, the downside was it was all in Swedish. So now what do? I habitually in the past, when I had to deal with a foreign language that I didn't know, I would learn some of the key phrases. For example, I'm looking for UFO reports or back in the 50s, flying saucer reports. So the UFO was very infrequently used until much later. So you get the Swedish term for flying saucer, flying saucers in plural. There's a big difference between singular and plural when you try to search out data like that. The singular more often surfaces sighting reports, and the plural more often gives you features and opinions and editorials. So that's the way I worked. I ran through these terms, and I entered them. I had to use all of the little funny characters that they had in other languages, and when I did that, it opened a door to quite a large amount of information. So I spent weeks going through that. One of the things I noticed in the Swedish press was that they seemed to focus a whole lot more on the possibilities that the Nazis were behind flying saucers. It's a very old idea. And Europe was much more into it, I think, than people on this side of the Atlantic were. But they were serious about it. And I think it led back to the times before Ken Arnold, when they dealt with two things, actually, in Sweden. Their first big wave of unknown aircraft or unidentified objects and all happened in 1933 with mystery aircraft that were flying over parts of Sweden. And the thing that bothered them was that some of these flights were in very, very dangerous conditions, including in the middle of snowstorms, which is almost unheard of back then. You were taking your life into your hands if you tried to fly in bad weather like that. But nevertheless, these reports started coming in December of 33, and then it appeared that rather than lasting a few weeks like most unknown aircraft waves did, this continued on through January, February, into the spring, summer, the rest of the year. And it actually continued on at a steady pace through World War II. I was dumbstruck by it. I knew of a few articles written in various UFO publications by isolated researchers now and then, but when I was finished just looking at the 1933 through World War II time frame, I ended up with over 1,000 pages of press. That's how much it was covered there. It was obvious that the Swedes were intensely interested in this for a number of reasons. They were worried about liquor running shortly after the Prohibition era. They were worried about the Russians. And then as World War II approached, they were worried about the Nazis flying aircraft and doing surveillance on them. They were very close to that theater of operation, and they worried them a great deal. So they paid a lot of attention to mystery flyers. And then almost immediately after the end of World War II, the mystery flyers, ghost pilots, they had a variety of terms for them, turned into the ghost rockets in 1946.
And this is interesting. I just found an article in Smithsonian Magazine about all of this and about technology that could potentially be an explanation for what people are seeing and how that, as the technology evolves, the same types of, things are seen when you have UFO sightings. And in this article, it says, in the age of aviation, war and fear of war have consistently fueled reports of unidentified objects. A year after Nazi Germany's surrender, Sweden was beset by at least 1,000 accounts of peculiar fast-moving objects. Starting in May of 46, residents described seeing missile or rocket-like objects in flight, which were dubbed the ghost rockets because of their fleeting nature. Rockets peppering Swedish skies was well within the realm of possibility. In 43 and 44, a number of V-1 and 2 rockets were launched from Germany and inadvertently crashed in the country. And so this is an article from Smithsonian, How UFO Reports Changed with the Technology of the Times. It's a great article.
Right. Well, it might have enhanced their case, I think, to mention that prior to 1946, the ghost rockets were spook flyers. or ghost flyers. And that had gone on for over a decade, which is amazing. It's interesting to think that Sweden beat the United States to mass sightings of unidentified objects in their skies by a good deal. It was already part of the culture over there, in fact. I remember one incident, I came across a few clips, and there was a movie advertisement. And it was for a film that I think was produced in 1935 called Central Airport, with a couple of old stars. And I was curious about that because it while they had the same cast as Central Airport, the name was different. The name the Swedes used was Spookflygaren, or spook pilot. And they were clearly using the spook flyer reports that were pouring in from just prior to that, and trying to use that to get people to go to the movie, thinking they were seeing something about the spook pilot that was over Sweden. It's not the first time UFO waves were used to promote Hollywood endeavors, but that was one of them.
And so I've got to ask you, I've got Cosmonaut 57 who wants to ask you, what is your take on ghost rockets?
Oh, some of them are almost certainly Russian tests from Peenemünde, maybe other places, but I think that's definitely a big factor. Not all of the reports could be identified. I know the Swedes put an effort around 2015 into trying to find one of the spook rockets that had flown over and landed in a lake. And the thinking was, if it splashed down and it was a missile type craft, it probably is still there. But as far as I know, they didn't have any success finding any wreckage. But the lake was quite large, and I think you probably needed a very large budget to comb all the territory that needed to be done. Often when people report a landing location, it's not there at all, but quite a distance away. So they'll just need a bigger budget and more help to do that.
Well, it's also interesting, and it's interesting, to me how my thoughts have changed over my few years in research in the public sense. I just, from what I thought, 5 years ago, it is so completely different to my feelings now. And I definitely have to say that I'm thinking more and more that a lot of the objects that have been seen, not all, but a lot, have to do with military endeavors, military tests, all sorts of things. And I think we need to be kind of cognizant of that, especially when you've got, in my opinion, something like the Tic Tac UFO that was leaked, and very well could have been something that we were testing for a multitude of reasons. But that's going to be for the next segment. I'm Erica Lukes here with my dear friend Barry Greenwood, the world's foremost UFO historian and archivist. We will be right back.
This is UFO Classified with Erica Lukes.
Erica Lukes.
The phone lines are open now at 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio. More UFO Classified.
UFO Classified
with Erica Lukes on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. After this.
Hello, KCOR listeners. Lorian Fenton here from the Fenton Files to tell you how to watch UFOCon 2020, which was held right before the virus scare and shelter in place. It was a conference like no other, so don't miss out on the specially priced on-demand replay of what is already the most talked about conference of 2020. Visit UFOCon2020.com. That's UFOCon2020.com.
Now, broadcasting in digital HD radio.
Thursday nights are about to get weird on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. Join hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz as they go exploring the bizarre. jet across the cosmos with two of the most electrifying paranormal researchers in the known universe. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern. Exploring the bizarre takes you deep within the world of the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology. It's time to take back the night with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz. Exploring the bizarre. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern. Only on the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
Are you ready to go?
It's showtime!
Here we go, world. You're listening to the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
Broadcasting from the heart of Las Vegas, Nevada.
Their base is so large it has to draw most of its power from the nearby nuclear fusion plant.
The future of radio is here and now.
Monday nights are about to become hauntingly good, as Reverend Sean Whittington possesses the airwaves with Vegas Supernatural. Tune in every Monday at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern for Vegas Supernatural, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. There's a war raging between good and evil. The question is, which side are you fighting on? Tune in Monday nights as Reverend Sean Whittington sets the new standard for paranormal radio with some of the most influential personalities in the world today. Vegas Supernatural, hosted by Reverend Sean Whittington, every Monday night at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. The one show even the devil doesn't want you to hear.
You're listening to
UFO Classified with Erica Lukes, where the truth isn't hidden beneath the black lines of a Sharpie.
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
To be on with Erica, call 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio.
Radio contact.
Share your thoughts on the show on Twitter by using hashtag KCOR. Or head over to the live chats at KCORradio.com.
The audience goes nuts!
And now, your host of UFO Classified.
Are you ready?
Erica Lukes.
Welcome back to UFO Classified. I want to thank all of my friends in chat who get on here and ask incredible questions, who support me. I also want to thank the people that support my show. This is a listener-supported show, and I could not do this without your support. I appreciate each and every one of you, and I want to give a shout out to Dave Beatty, who's been on my show before, and he is a great he makes great documentaries, and he did one on the Nimitz. I'll be posting links to that. I just really appreciate people that understand this is something that we need to find truth about. And I don't, I'm not beholden to anyone. I don't have advertisers that I need to work with. This is something that I want to maintain the integrity of, because I don't want to be bought and paid for like so many people you see in the UFO community, especially when you look at some of the UFO podcasts or shows. They definitely have sponsors. They need to be mindful of those sponsors, and they're going to promote things that, in my opinion, might not be in the best interest of the subjects. And I'm looking at right now 40 Times, and this was from April 1997. Interestingly enough, it has an article on Utah's UFO ranch. Imagine that. But in here, you look at some of the advertising: Element, Uncover the Truth, Dead Sea Scrolls and the First Christians, or Bloodline of the Holy Grail, the Mayan Prophecy. You look through these publications, and it's just interesting to see where they're leaning. And there are also many articles, as there have been for decades, about people that vanish, that just drop off the face of the planet, are never seen again. And So it's, and then here's an article, what a way to spend Easter with blood on their hands, scratches on their faces, wounds on their feet. They suffer like Christ. Ted Harrison records the changing face of stigmatics and their importance to the believers of the church. And so it is really interesting to look back and say, what is the agenda here? How easily is that agenda manipulated by political or religious factions? I think that is something that is something we don't really look at, and that needs to be addressed, because I feel very strongly that those types of things are taking place in current quote-unquote ufology. So there you have that. Barry, we've had a great conversation in the first half an hour about ghost rockets and different things, discoveries that you're making, and I love that. And I've got a question here again from Cosmonaut 57, and he wants to know if you think any of the contactees in the 50s were actually genuine.
Well, probably not. They didn't really come along until about 1952 when George Adamski surfaced, and I think his was the first widely disseminated contactee story because of that. It happened in late 52, I believe. And by then, we'd already have a big wave in 47, big wave in 1950, another big wave in 1952 in the summer. And I think, true to character, this subject, and I think it's been proven out over time, but back then, it was the beginnings of an evolution of how the subject was perceived by the population. We went from initially in 1947, when the modern era began, with flying discs far away, very fast streaking objects, and more often than not, people would be surprised to know they were quite small. They weren't big spaceship type things. Most of the flying discs reported, I think, were regarded as a few inches or a few feet in diameter. And that went on for a while until around 1950, when you started to see the development of ET in the stories, particularly overseas. But in the U.S., it was the same. There was a tinge of, well, maybe these aren't foreign secret aircraft after all, like they thought in 47, the possibility that the Russians were testing vehicles here. That seemed to have gone by the wayside in 1950. And you see the first elements of spacemen coming into this, UFOs from other planets. In 52, it just grew bigger because of the activity over Washington. But even with Washington, there was a general trend of sightings upward, beginning in the spring of 52. And here we go again with more and more sightings, radar detections. But I think people were kind of anxious to see where this was going, and culturally anyway, a natural extension of what had happened for those previous years was we should start seeing these things up close. They should be nearer. We should see some kind of detail, structure on these objects, and maybe even if these things are from outer space, we should start seeing entities, whoever's running them. And lo and behold, you began to have people coming out saying that they were on the ships. Well, Adamski was early on that, and he made a killing on it. He published a book of his so-called memoirs about his experiences on flying saucers and meeting space creatures, and it was quite a popular book for a while after that. And I think, strangely enough, because that book was successful, it helped other UFO books that may have been more mundane, but still stress the strangeness of the phenomenon. And Donald Kehoe is one I'm thinking of, that his ideas and his conversations with people, and especially his contacts feeding him reports from the Air Force, helped his narrative along that way. But there was a big upswing now in contactees from about late 52 onward. And I think for much of the rest of that decade, contactees tended to dominate, especially in the latter half of the 50s.
Well, let me just ask you, because the contactee movement is very interesting, and a lot of, what people are, these contactees are saying. They're talking about the benevolent space brothers and different the groups of the tall Nordics, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed beings, and things that fit within, you could say that fits in to a different ideology. And so were some of the people involved in the contactee movement, were they kind of on the radar of the intelligence community because some of their political beliefs?
Certainly, yes. I mean, Adamski was on the FBI's radar because he had left the United States to lecture about his experiences. And one thing he did that caught their attention was he was very critical of the U.S. government. I mean, that's something you didn't do in those days. Tell foreigners that you had problems with the way our government was run, and they kept an eye on him. They may have with other contactees, but his was the most vivid example of the government wondering what these people were all about. But then again, you already mentioned that they reported tall, blonde beings. Quite often they were very beautiful creatures, and it almost smacks of sort of a religious belief, doesn't it? The way they describe these people that they had met. That was certainly a big part of their presentation too, that they were representing themselves as, maybe prophets of a new religion that was coming about due to their experiences and relating that to the public and all. It sort of set them up as figures that were above the average UFO person. That they were on the ship, so you have to pay more attention to them than to people like Kehoe, who only saw them from a distance or reported them from a distance. It was a whole new social movement on UFOs, and I have to say it wasn't very helpful to the serious presentation of UFOs from that point on. I think the contactees would get as much, if often more press than anyone trying to advocate that UFOs should be taken seriously. When you have someone next to you saying, I was on the ship and I ate cookies and drank with them, people given religious proclivities out there would tend to believe that and admire that more so, and they acquired quite a following. Adamski's been dead for a long time, and yet there's still people that worship him practically.
Well, that's another story in and of itself. The people that religious, they're people that I could give examples of. I won't name names. I'm sure you can guess. But right now, they're the cult favorites in the UFO movement, and they're promoting as much nonsense as some of the contactees were promoting. But people still believe them hook, line, and sinker. And I think that's really quite a danger. And you've got these different kind of UFO cults that develop over time. And I wanted to just go back a little bit to Kehoe and, the extraterrestrial hypothesis, and that really, does that truly get a foothold until Kehoe goes on and puts more publicity out there about extraterrestrials and aliens and all of this. It seems like he was pretty much one of the forefathers.
Well, he certainly was the most prominent advocate of aliens from space, as he titled his last book. He thought UFOs were from places like Mars, or at least Mars, and most certainly other planets somewhere that perhaps we didn't know about. But he presented it in a way that I think over time revealed that it wasn't probably the best thing to do. For example, Mars, he attributed a great deal of credit to Mars being the source of sightings, UFO visitations. But as we began to send probes to Mars to investigate, we found out that it wasn't quite the place it was advertised to have been in the 50s and earlier. Percival Lowell with canals, for example. There were no cities, there were no canals, there was no organized running water from one oasis to another. It just didn't turn out to be so. The place looked pretty arid and not civilized. Well, Mars turned out to be quite interesting, as we found out later, but the old idea of it being a haven of civilization just fell apart in the early 60s.
And I want to talk a little bit about, because I think this is fascinating. You know, you look at NICAP and you look at the people, the founding fathers of NICAP, and their, I mean, obvious connections to, I mean, they're in the military, they're in CIA, different things like that. Can you give us a little bit of background of NICAP, its inception, and the people that were involved in the organization?
Yeah, well, Kehoe didn't start NICAP, as a lot of people might think. It was originally intended to be a research organization with a big budget, lots of scientists, and all. Was organized or semi-organized by a fellow named T. Townsend Brown, who was very interested in gravity and anti-gravity as something to exploit as technology. And he had high ideas on how to promote NICAP. He had a prospectus out on it as to what they wanted to do. They wanted a high-profile magazine and a lot of funding and big budget and people to send out to do research. But the ideal he had wasn't fulfilled very well. There was no big budget. They tried to publish a magazine. Initially, it was quite large, but they had to reduce the size of it again because of lack of money. So Brown had to exit very shortly after he tried to start the organization, and Donald Kehoe stepped in to take over and run it more as a more conventional UFO research organization. And he never had a big budget. He was able to get occasional donations from folks. And I think a lot of that was powered on his ability to bring together a board of NICAP that consisted of scientists and engineers and especially military men.
Right. And I want to just, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think this is really important. You look at Thomas Townsend Brown, and you look at the fact that he was in the United States Navy. He worked at the United States Naval Research Laboratory, and like you mentioned, he was working on all of these exotic technologies and things. And I think that is, again, it's very similar to what you see with some of the credentials of people in MUFON and some of the people that they have worked for, the companies that they have worked for over the decades. And I find that very fascinating. So I just wanted to, and he was also at Lockheed. So I wanted to just kind of throw that in there because it is interesting how all of these key players in specific organizations have ties.
Well, yeah, I mean, from the time Brown was trying to build the organization, I think, and I think we've discussed this before too, that because of the abundance of military or ex-military people interested in promoting this as a research organization and all, there was an element of, I think, conservative right-wing politics in the NICAP's pursuit of trying to get to the bottom of flying saucer reports. They had a number of people who had been involved in fundraising early on. One was Nicholas de Rochefort. He was a count who built up a social standing in Washington, and he worked for NICAP for a period of time. Exactly what he did is not very clear. It appeared that whatever his intent was to get involved with NICAP, it rather petered out, and he drifted off and took a few other people with him that were of the same mindset, fundraising amongst Washington elite. So, after that, Kehoe was left to deal with it with his board members and a small but loyal membership. But there is an element of right-wing politics involved in it and all, and I think that sort of carried through in a number of incidents with NICAP over the years. And it might seem odd to say that because NICAP basically was hounding the Air Force for many, many years to reveal the truth about flying saucers.
Sounds like To the Stars Academy.
NICAP was basically a lobby organization more than anything, and I think that's what they were trying to do is take existing information and unveil it, because they didn't have the budget to be able to do a lot of research and digging on their own. They had a loyal collection of subcommittees who people would go out and investigate sighting reports, but I don't think you were going to hit gold very often with the kind of budget and personnel that they were able to field, mostly volunteers. So,
amazing what volunteers do for an organization.
Well, they did, I think, the best they could, given what they were handed. The NICAP, for all their existence, had complained about lack of funds. They had to do everything on a shoestring budget. And it wasn't very helpful to advancing the cause as they were trying to promote it. They managed to keep above water for many, many years, but it eventually caught up with them. I think after the Condon report was published, that took the gas out of everyone's balloons on the subject, and NICAP just kind of trundled along for a decade until they had to go under.
Well, and so I want to ask you a little bit about Air Force Colonel Joseph Bryan III, because he seems like a very enigmatic figure, and his son, CDB Bryan, has also played an important role with abductions and all sorts of things. So give our listening audience...
It's odd because I think Bryan, he was connected with NICAP in the later years. He was the head of the board, and he was an ex-CIA person, as many other NICAPers were, retired, and he was with NICAP at this point, but they seemed intent on running things their own way, and they weren't the same way that Donald Kehoe, essentially their spiritual head for what he was trying to do, get people riled up and excited about revealing the truth on what the government knew. Bryan didn't want that element in there, and I think part of it was because Kehoe was very incapable, I think, of management with money and with business sense. And the businessmen, the people that were in government, wanted to run it more like a business. I always thought that there's two elements to an organization like that, investigating that kind of a topic. You had to have either administrators or researchers, and one doesn't do the other's job. Kehoe was a researcher trying to administer the organization. It didn't work. He had to concentrate on one thing and forget the other, leave it to someone else to fundraise and take care of the membership and organize the office and all. And I think that was one of NICAP's biggest downfalls. But on the other hand, Colonel Bryant, I think, represented the business end of it more so than anything. And after Kehoe was essentially drummed out along with Gordon Lohr in late '69, they tried running it like a business, but it was doomed from the start because here were administrators trying to do research. That doesn't work either.
But I mean, do you think there's anything to the fact, because we know, and Gordon's been on the show talking about the takedown of NICAP by the intelligence community. And so, I mean, what?
Well, the NICAP, to say that the intelligence community only took them down, it wasn't that. I mean, you know, there may have been some element there, but you could clearly show that their mismanagement was a big part of it too. But you know, the thing I was trying to emphasize was that when the 70s rolled around after Kehoe was gone, they couldn't they couldn't do research. They couldn't present information in the manner that excited people. They tended to be rather boring, in fact. And the newsletter was only a 4-page publication. A lot of it was devoted to organizational matters rather than citing information. You didn't often see the comprehensive reports on sightings. They were going on, but you didn't really see that through NICAP. And that tended to doom them in the last decade of their existence. But to say the intelligence community only was responsible, no, I don't think so. I think there were a lot of other elements besides that. But yes, there were people from within the government that were there, and especially in the case of Stuart Nixon, who was appointed to the office staff in the last part of the 60s, he seemed to run counter to what everybody else was trying to do. He was more of a hindrance than a help. And maybe he was ordered to do that. Maybe he wasn't. I don't know. It'd be nice to talk to the guy sometime to find out if you could question him on it.
Do you think that there is any chance that this organization was started just to cover up things that were taking place within the military? I mean, to me, it with Kehoe and some of his beliefs are in really promoting the ETH and things. I mean, could that be a possibility?
There is something in NICAP's early history where Kehoe talked about hidden reports. These were cases that he thought were pretty spectacular, but he couldn't say anything about them for one reason or another.
We're going to touch on that, the hidden reports. That's really interesting, and it's important. I'm Erica Lukes here with my friend and mentor Barry Greenwood. If you don't have clear intent, please get it. We will be right back.
Listen very carefully.
This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
This is UFO Classified, live every Friday night, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. The truth is out there, just waiting to be discovered.
And now, if you will, accompany me on a journey to the future.
For more information on the host of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes, upcoming guests, as well as links to the past shows,
visit her website at UFOclassified.com.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcasting from a shack just south of Area 51.
Wait, that doesn't exist.
This is the KCOR Digital Radio Network. Now for the news.
This landed at a ranch at Corona, New Mexico. The rancher turned it over to the Air Force. Rancher W.W. Brazil was the man who discovered the saucer.
What I thought was a star began coming in my direction at a very rapid rate of speed.
The unidentified object, which some sources thought might be a blimp, moved slowly down the Pacific coast from Santa Monica and disappeared south of Long Beach.
I saw a UFO, and it went down the river, turned right at the United Nations, turned left, and then down the river.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
No more plausible deniability. Fact, fiction, or the truth. You decide. And now, the new voice of the high desert, the hostess of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes.
Welcome back and happy Fantopia Friday. I am always happy to be here with my friends from all over the world. It's been amazing to see the different messages I'm getting from Germany and Austria and Australia. There is a big big group of people out there who are paying attention to what I'm saying, to the guests that I'm interviewing, and they understand there is something grossly wrong with the narrative that we're being fed by the ufological masterminds, people who have been working for a long, long time to stay relevant, people who have been working to steer the narrative and do all sorts of different things. I'm glad that there is a group of people that are intelligent enough to understand we are not being given the truth, and there are lots of different factors involved. I am here with one of my friends and mentors, Barry Greenwood, who wrote the book Clear Intent, co-authored it with his co-author Larry Fawcett back in 1984. You need to get Clear Intent. I know it's one of those books, and Barry, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's not in publication anymore, so you need to find a copy of it on eBay, right?
Well, if you know where to look, it's perpetually available because there's so many books out there that have been scanned and put on the net somewhere that it can be found if you put effort into it.
Okay, and then I would definitely, like I said, I would recommend that. You both broke a lot of ground on that. And when we left, we were talking about Stuart Nixon, NICAP, Kehoe, and then the hidden reports. And so, give us a little bit of information on the hidden reports.
Yeah, Kehoe, I think especially in his book Flying Saucers Top Secret in 1960, wrote of what he called hidden cases. These are cases that during the time he was writing his books and then later in the early years of NICAP were it was information coming to him from highly placed sources or people in important jobs who didn't want to be identified or connected to flying saucers at the time because, occasionally it would wreck careers if people found out. That they wanted Kehoe to have the data, but they couldn't be connected to the sightings. So Kehoe really couldn't say much about the credibility of one of these stories, but only pass along some basic information, some detail.
And I have to just stop you right there because my jaw's on the floor. That sounds remarkably similar to some of the current people that are UFO journalists who are getting this insider information and are parsing out things, but they can't back it up. So I just had to throw that in there.
Well, that happened back then. That's almost 60 years ago. So, he would give some information about these sightings in his book, and then later through the UFO Investigator, which was NICAP's publication. But that was it. That's all you found. And when I started doing research on the CUFOS files several years ago, that was one of the things I wanted to find out about. I mean, these were Donald Kehoe's files. NICAP, CUFOS, and some other organizations were all incorporated. And I thought, well, maybe some of these hidden reports are in there. So I looked and looked and looked and looked, and I couldn't come across them. I was puzzled by it. But in speaking to people later on who knew Kehoe, they related the fact that NICAP's files didn't necessarily have all of what Kehoe had done, all the research he had done. And the hidden cases apparently were some of what he had kept in his own personal files out at his home. And he never let on that he had these things beyond what he said in the books. He never made duplicate copies of them, as far as anyone knows, and kept them somewhere safe. He just kept the original reports. And then as he grew older and passed on, all trace of those reports have disappeared. And we can't get them anymore. And that's a tragedy because they sounded like intriguing stories, and it would have been nice to see the details of them. But that, like many, many other things in this subject, have disappeared to time.
And so I want to ask you, because we've heard a lot about the 500-page report that Bass did, that, and that only a couple of people have had the privilege of laying their eyes on. And so, I mean, when you look back at what took place then, and how things have disappeared and nobody's been able to verify these things. I mean, how do you put that in context with what's taking place now, when you've got people that are saying they've viewed things that eventually will never be put forward and disappear?
Oh yeah, it's deja vu all over again, as Yogi Berra said. You're hearing that the same events happen. We have stories, but we really can't tell you everything about them. And eventually they'll come out. And as time goes along, it seems like it's less and less likely that you're going to get those details on these, whatever the stories were that they were hinting at. And, is that an element of human nature to sit on a treasure chest and bait people on it, and then pull the carrot back once you get close to chewing on it? I don't know, but there's all kinds of hinting that continues going on about getting the answer, getting to the bottom of things, and it just never seems to happen. We're still waiting, but go ahead.
And so, sorry, and I just want to ask you, because over the decades, there are always these people that are the chosen ones, people that are getting this insider information and they're putting it forward, but they can't reveal their sources, and they can't reveal, all of these things that just kind of promotes this mysterious narrative and confuses the subject and things. And I mean, I see that going on today, probably, more than it ever has, because of, unfortunately, the influence of social media and the internet. It's very easy to find gullible people who aren't willing to do their homework and look at all different things and put that forward. But I mean, what are your thoughts when you look at some of the supposed revelations that are coming out now with regard to the, Bass and Bigelow and all of these things?
Well, they are parsing out information in pieces. I mean, the example you gave of the 500-page 10-month report that came out from Popular Mechanics a few months ago as an example, that someone was shown a few pages of it and they were allowed to reproduce a bit of it, and that's it. That's all you can see, and there's no telling when the rest of it will come out. I mean, is the implication of doing that they have an answer to the subject and they're just trying to gin up more interest and maybe more fundraising? Or is the report, is the rest of the report inadequate and won't prove their case at all? You can't judge until you see the report. If they don't release it, you're in limbo, essentially. You can't do anything with it, but you always wonder what's behind it. You'd settle those questions once and for all by releasing these reports, making them available and let them be independently judged. That's what science is all about. Taking claims like that, putting them on the table, letting people kick them around to see if the information can be falsified. If there's something wrong with it, that'll be quickly apparent. But if it's solid and great information, then I think honest people will admit to that and say, well, we've got a case here. I mean, it is possibilities because of the way the Navy has behaved in recent times. I was stunned when they said that the videos that were released by way of To the Stars were real. They were real releases, and that they remain unidentified. I mean, if that happened in the 1960s, that would have been a sensation.
But, I mean, we've seen different cases like this over the years, and it's like, okay, so you've got videos that were released without authorization that made their way onto the internet, and then you've got, obviously the Pentagon, different people were forced for answers on this, and could that have been something, some sort of technology that we're developing and it got leaked? And so, of course, they're backed into a corner and they have to say, of course, this is unidentified. They're not saying it's extraterrestrial, which I think is important. And most people are assuming, and when you've got people at To the Stars Academy were saying it's extraterrestrial and all of this different stuff. It leads people down a path where they're missing certain steps in the whole process of understanding what this is.
Well, to much of the public now, unidentified flying object means spaceship. And they read it that way. So when the Navy says this is unidentified, that's like a automatic admission that it's a spacecraft of some kind. It's not. That's a false conclusion from what the Navy is saying. They're admitting enough, saying it's unidentified. I mean, that's interesting that they would acknowledge that much. But no, it doesn't mean there's proof of extraterrestrials here, like some of the organizations are saying. They're not careful. They never have been careful with this information. Just take a little step at a time, but they want to take a big chunk and push the narrative of ET from space much more prematurely than it should be, if it exists at all.
Exactly, and I think that it's interesting, and we need to step back and look at some of these things. But unfortunately, you've got these groups of people who have been promoting Bob Lazar and some of the things that the players that were involved with Area 51, and you've got them coming out and they've been given these documents that nobody else has access to, and all of these things are. I mean, it's just. Well, you step back and you look at this and you think, seriously?
It's the old brick wall. It's the old brick wall. It's been there from the time of Kenneth Arnold. And apparently it'll never go away. You take any information on this subject and march it forward to apparently the ideal of showing that this is evidence of space. You present it that way, you push it into the media, you try to elaborate on the claims, but at some point, all of these reach a brick wall, and you can never get by it for final proof. Final proof would mean the controversy is over. Is the controversy over now? We're still debating over whether it's real or not. So, no, the debate's not over. It's still happening, and the brick wall is still there and waiting for something to either punch through it or go over the top of the wall. And there's a lot of intriguing circumstantial information out there, but that's where it stops. And we want the proof. If they have proof, like they seem to imply they have now within these organizations, then present it. Let's see the 500-page report. Let's see more videos. They said there were many more videos than what's been presented. They said that in the media. We haven't seen them. Where are they? Put them out there. Let's judge what's going on. But you almost wonder if there's some element of attempting to exploit the possibility that these things will turn out to be exotic technology. And if you're going to exploit it, that's a business secret. And you don't want everybody seeing it. You want the business to exploit it first. And they're going to hang on to it and keep it suppressed as much as possible until there's no possibility left of exploiting that technology, either through inadequate information or it just never came up to snuff in the first place. That's what bothers me about this. The secrecy is sort of corporate more than anything with a lot of these folks. They want to make a buck and they don't want to show their hand until they can capitalize on it.
Well, and I think that's absolutely true. And it was interesting because I was in my library today and I came across the International UFO Reporter. This was spring 2000, volume 25, number 1. And in this is an article by John Schuessler, who we all know has been involved with MUFON from the get-go. And it was on the detection of UFOs using state-of-the-art technology. And he talks about working with U.S. human spaceflight programs on classified and non-classified new technologies. And he's saying that this could, we could look at these technologies and do UFO research. And then he also has a segment here partnering with government agencies. This is back in 2000 And he says in the past 50 years, thousands of individuals and non-governmental groups have spent hundreds of thousands of hours amassing evidence about UFOs. At several points during this period, the United States, France, Russia, and several other governments commissioned investigations and studied, but apparently they enjoyed no more success in eliminating the mystery than private groups. And then he also goes on to talk about government agencies regularly partner with industry, academia, and private research organizations. He gives the example of the National Security Agency in 1999 that was selected to spearhead a U.S. Defense Department effort to develop, with commercial assistance, joint tactical signals intelligence systems. Similar efforts have been conducted by private think tanks, universities such as the University of Texas, Texas A&M, and aerospace corporations. Such joint ventures almost always enjoy a high level of success. So here you have Schuessler, and then he's going through these different types of technology that we could be using with regard to UFO research, but obviously he was involved in the aerospace industry, as were several others at MUFON. People involved with NIDS, Bigelow, all of these things, and so. What is that game? You go back to 2000 and you're seeing this kind of stuff. And then you're also seeing some of the reports or the papers that Schuessler wrote on, you've got, or Mark Roediger, you've got the electromagnetic interference with vehicles. You've got some of these other reports that are being put forward that if you look at them, they might potentially not have anything to do with UFO research, but perhaps something that is a military technology.
Yeah, I mean, there's a history of close encounters of the second kind involving physical effects, electromagnetic effects, auto engine stalling, magnetic anomalies, and so on and so forth. There's many, many reports like that, and some of them are fascinating, but they're circumstantial. It was reported at one point that Barney and Betty Hill's car were magnetized. On the trunk, there was some shiny spots that were noticed, and they were investigated and mentioned in the original report, but apparently that's where it stopped. That would have been fascinating to find out what happened with these magnetic spots and why they were there. Did anyone do anything with them? No. And it's intriguing, but what can you do with it? And virtually all the other reports come under that category. They're narratives now. You can't exploit the potential of what they're saying.
Absolutely. And I know it sounds like Jan's trying to call you.
Actually, that is Jan. Yeah. He's going to have to wait.
Well, maybe you should tell him to call in the show. I'm sure he has lots of interesting things to say if he's.
Well, I'll save them for you for next week.
Well, thank you. That could be.
That would be. Then you can have them all to yourself for 2 hours.
Oh my gosh, this just makes me happy. And with regard to, and thanks for addressing what I was just mentioning, I do find it interesting that, you've got people like Schuessler and different people involved with aerospace companies. And, could there be a different agenda to what they're doing? Absolutely. I think it's important to ask those questions. But I want to ask you, we've just got a few minutes before we go to break. But, you talk about the Betty and Barney Hill case, and then we go into the abduction phenomena. And then you look at the fact that Bigelow sponsored a conference at MIT. And you were there, right?
I wasn't in the conference, but I was on the outside, and I met with people after, I think during the breaks and afterwards, yeah. They invited me to give a paper, but I felt what I could write about was not within topic to what they were doing. I wasn't an abduction researcher. I had no expertise on it. And they said, just talk about government documents. And I said, it really doesn't fit in with the whole thing of what they were doing. There was not a single government document relating to abductions at that time. And even now. So I don't know what I could have said that would have been on topic.
And so let's look back at the abduction phenomena and when, who were the proponents of that and where did they get their funding for research? Because I find that very interesting. And I want to mention, we just got a couple minutes before break, but Bigelow was a big supporter of people that were looking into abduction research. And he also, the Roper poll survey was very interesting, and I want to ask if there's anything about that, because I think this is curious to see how things evolved from just having, the flying saucer reports, the UFO reports, and then all of a sudden we're looking into abductions that seemed to be something that was brand new on the scene. And then you look at the people behind the scenes that are funding abduction research and things, and to me that just seems quite interesting. So I look forward to asking you about some of those things when we get back.
Right.
And before we get ready to go to break, we've got 2 minutes to break, but what are your thoughts just really quickly about why things went from flying saucers to abductions?
Well, it falls into a line of thinking I've had for a long time watching the subject. Since the 60s, I've been seeing it develop day by day. And what it suggested to me was that the public had an expectation of what the phenomenon was going to turn into. And oddly enough, that's what the phenomenon turned into, an ever-escalating series of strange developments, where you began with distant objects and they got closer and closer. They landed, creatures got out eventually, and then people started having contact with the creatures. And then with the abductions, people were being brought on board forcibly and medically probed. So I think that the public thought that's the way the phenomenon should develop, and that's what it turned into.
And it is quite curious to see how that took place. And I don't know, the deeper I dig, the more I find some pretty big questions that we need to ask about why this was inserted in some of the things, especially with the Roper poll and things, and some of the comments in Forbidden Science too, from Jacques Vallée with regard to Bigelow. It's curious, and I want to ask you about that when we get back. I'm Erica Lukes here with my friend Barry Greenwood. Stick around. We've got one more segment, and I'm sure this next segment will be fantastic.
Stand by.
This is UFO Classified with Erica Lukes.
Erica Lukes.
The phone lines are open now at 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio. More UFO Classified.
UFO Classified
with Erica Lukes on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. After this.
Paranormal radio never sounded so good. Love, light, and the paranormal. Hosted by Reverend J. Live every Sunday, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Right here on the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
No mercy, no pity, no fear.
Come explore the world of the paranormal with distinguished and sometimes not so renowned authors, investigators, as well as TV and radio personalities from around the world. Whether it's love and light or the darkness of the abyss.
This is insanity!
We go down the road others are afraid to travel. The only question is, are you ready for it? Love, Light, and the Paranormal. Hosted by Reverend J. Live Sunday, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Your paranormal voyage starts here.
There is a world outside that which we live in, a realm where fact and fiction collide. The Paradigm Matrix.
The Paradigm Matrix.
Hosted by Willie Miranda, every Friday night at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern.
The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us, even now in this very moment.
The 1 hour show that will surely leave you hanging on the edge of the rabbit hole. The Paradigm Matrix explores a universe of topics from UFOs, cryptozoology, conspiracies, as well as all things paranormal.
Enter a world of the twisted and deformed.
Friday night, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. The Paradigm Matrix, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network, where fact and fiction collide.
Great.
It's great. I think it's great. I think it's
The all-new KCOR Digital Radio Network.
great.
Make a note of it.
It's great.
We interrupt this program to annoy you and make things generally irritating.
At the end of the day, we turn the lights down in the KCOR studio.
Oh, sweet.
And crank up the hottest club songs from around the world.
This is the future.
The Grind, mixed by Tina Marie, your Vegas vixen of the high desert.
What about the body? What kind of body?
Good body. Nice body.
Every night from 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. Pacific. The best 3 hours of commercial-free music.
New music first.
It's time to stand up and dance your ass off. The Grind, nightly and exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
Come on, it's kind of hot.
You're listening to UFO Classified with Erica Lukes, where the truth isn't hidden beneath the black lines of a Sharpie.
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
To be on with Erica, call 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio.
Radio contact.
Share your thoughts on the show on Twitter by using hashtag KCOR. Or head over to the live chats at KCORradio.com.
The audience goes nuts.
And now, your host of UFO Classified.
Are you ready?
Erica Lukes.
Welcome back to the last half of UFO Classified. I want to thank my listeners and supporters from all over the world. You are the reason that I'm here, and this has not been an easy path for me to undertake over the years to try to go up against the UFO community and some of its cultish leaders. It's not been a pleasant thing, but the more I learn, the more I understand that there is something very, very wrong, and we need to get information out to the public about all of this, the manipulation, the use of the subject to create this smokescreen where things can happen to people like my husband, like his colleague, Chris Bartell, like the community of the Uinta Basin. We need to pay attention to this. And I want to just read something from Forbidden Science 4. I have so many marks in this book and so many leads I'm going to be following, but this is Hummingbird, Thursday, 29th April, 1993. And it says, until recently, one could argue before the technical community that lack of funding has hampered UFO investigation. This is no longer the case. In the last few years, UFO advocates and abduction researchers have had large sums at their disposal. Grants for digs at Roswell, funding by Mr. Bigelow and Prince Hans Adam for the Roper Survey, financing of conferences, the meeting in Cambridge, and current abduction studies reach well over $500,000. That doesn't include the monies given to the Fund for UFO Research. Any scientific panel reviewing the field will have to have the right to ask what has resulted from such spending. The answer is very little, and it isn't even accessible in a form that permits independent assessment. So that is quite interesting. And Barry, we've been talking a lot about different things. We've been talking about NICAP, the hidden reports, Betty and Barney Hill, and then the fact that you were there when the MIT conference was taking place. You weren't in there, but you were on the periphery. What? Let's go in a little bit deeper to all the abduction stuff, because that appeared at a specific time, and it seems to me now, looking at it, that there were ideas that were seeded into the community. What was the role of Prince Hans Adams and Bigelow, and why did Bigelow give so much money to different organizations to sweep up their data?
I think with the people financing some of the high-end projects and all. I think they had a personal vested interest in some of these topics. And it makes sense when you think of it that if you believe that UFOs are real, if you believe they're from some other place than here, they're not part of a military program or anything, then you're going to see abductions as probably the key to finding more detailed information about the nature of the phenomenon than just about anything else you can look into. I mean, you have people going on vehicles, talking in great detail about what's in those vehicles and conversations they had and things they observed and so on. And there's many hundreds of these reports now. I would think that if you believe those are the best kinds of reports to collect, then you're going to go out and collect them in a big way. Some years ago, when we had a call about Ray Fowler's files, that he had to dispose of his records. And there was a plan to sell them to a place in Florida, and who knows what would have happened at that point. But when I found out about it, I wanted to rush right up and talk to Ray and see if we could divert that intent and keep the stuff in New England somehow. So I went up there a few days before Christmas and spoke to Ray and all, and made an arrangement with him to save his case files and his correspondence and various other things. About 6 boxes of records that he passed along from his early years, which thank goodness they're available now. But when I was there were some other boxes. He had cleared out much of his house. This was a study that he always held meetings in, and he always conducted astronomy classes, so he'd have small groups sitting up here, and then they'd be filled with files and all. But at this point, beyond the stuff that I picked up, there wasn't much left, except against one wall, there'd something like a dozen cardboard boxes that were all filled and sealed up. And I said, "Oh, more files you're getting rid of?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "But those were accounted for already." And I said, "Oh," I said, "what kind are they?" He said, "They're abductions," which I presumed included Andreas and Affair files and whatever else he had looked into. He had investigated a number of other cases. So if you know anything about personally looking into abduction stories, you realize that one story can accumulate a large pile of paper in terms of transcripts and reports and so on. Transcripts alone can take up volumes. When you put people under hypnosis and do those for hours on end, there's a lot of paperwork. So he had these boxes filled, and I said, "Oh, what do you plan on doing with them?" He said, "Well, they're going to someone else," but he wouldn't tell me who it was. And I had the thought in mind that it might have been someone like Bigelow and all, but I had no way to tell. So then I had heard prior to that time that a MUFON guy, John Carpenter, had sold his abduction files.
Right.
And this is all around the same time frame. So someone was scooping all these things up for whatever purpose. And I know Bigelow is very interested in that, and he feels that's the key to unlocking new, possibly technological information.
Or he might think that is a way to manipulate the public.
Well, if
insert propaganda into that, so we can use that as a smokescreen to hide what perhaps he could potentially be doing.
I mean, it would get tricky, though, if you use those files for other than pure research purposes, because essentially you're playing with people's lives. I know Carpenter got into trouble selling the files because the people who were the subjects of those investigations didn't like the details of their experiences going out to outsiders.
Right, but I mean, and as you know, it's the fact that Bigelow, I mean, with the Carpenter files, that's been, or the MUFON database. I mean, all of these things that has been the kind of the thing, and there have been, in my opinion, pretty grave security breaches with people's personal data. And that's been something that we've seen time and time again with regard to Bigelow sweeping up these databases.
Well, maybe you can answer a question for me. Chris Marks was in Bigelow's library. Did he see abduction reports by the shelves full?
He didn't, but I mean, who knows where those reports would be? So,
but they weren't stored in Bigelow's library.
No, they weren't stored in Bigelow's library. But I would venture a guess that the data and some of these reports were probably kept. People weren't given access to them. To me, in my opinion, when I look back at things and I listened to Chris and I had Dr. Angela Thompson-Smith on a few weeks ago, and she was talking about the fact that she went out pre-NIDS days and purchased a lot of these things in the library for Bigelow. But I mean, you have to think that maybe, especially since these were databases, these weren't books, these weren't printed files, that these files were actually kept in a little bit more of a secure environment. Perhaps Colm Kelleher and co had access to the data, and Valet and Kit Green and some of the people that were involved.
Well, yeah, I mean, you could almost call them privileged medical files if it wasn't for the fact that it was ufologists that were doing most of the investigations into those stories. I mean, basically, they're amateurs.
Right, but I mean, I think the thing that's concerning to me and any normal person, is the fact that people's privacy was compromised. You've got the Carpenter, like you're saying, and some of these reports that are very personal, and you're trusting a source that you're giving this information to, and those files are sold, and then also UFO encounters and names and addresses, and those files were sold, and so
as you well know, ufologists are not qualified to investigate stories like that. I don't care how well they're trained. They don't have the medical expertise to look into stories like that and play with people's minds.
No, they don't. And that's the kind of, it's one of those things that we see, because ufology it's like, and I've heard this kind of silly, but it is like the wild, wild west, because you have people that are behaving badly. You've got no standards, professional standards. You've got no ethical standards, and you've got people that can get away with promoting mistruths or sweeping up databases, or taking people that are in the military working for an organization and put them out in the middle of a ranch, and then have them subjected to things where you've clearly got people on the record that worked for NIDS, that worked for Bigelow, saying these people have been injured. And in a certain percentage of the cases, this results in death. And so you've got these type of things. And to me, that is very alarming, and I'm sure that you would agree with that.
Yeah, well, what concerns me is that you have deaths out at these places being reported. How do you hide them?
I would suppose, you've got, perhaps you have allegiance with certain people in law enforcement. Maybe there's something with people that have been around the property, that have been on the payroll, that have signed NDAs. I don't know. I mean, I think there's a whole list of things that we need to look into with that. So
that would be quite a conspiracy if they could hide deaths due to UFO activity. Because
I don't think it's UFO activity, though. That's the thing. But
supposed UFO activity. Let's put it that way.
Right. Well,
they don't even. It's even more so incumbent on getting to the bottom of the real reason behind that. If it's not UFO related, it's something else, then authorities have to become more involved to find out what that other else is.
Absolutely. Yes, they do. And I think when we look at some of the mishandling of data and different things that have taken place, we probably should be looking to the legal community to help resolve some of this, because there are some pretty serious implications involved. But on a different note, I want to ask, because you've got Cosmonaut 57 again asking a question, what you think about Dr. Jacobs.
Oh, I've known Dave for ages. I mean, I haven't seen him much in recent times, but I met with him off and on years ago, especially in the 80s. And very early on, he was doing history on the subject. His first thesis was a UFO history book that was published in 1975, and I was greatly impressed with the work, and it was a first really good history book on the subject by an academic. And Dave himself was very humble, because I had supper with him one night after one of the local conferences here, and he felt he made a ton of mistakes, and he can't take them back now. He's got to eat them and all. But I said, what I did with clear intent was that I knew at some point some of those stories might not pan out. I mean, we had a certain amount of information that was good up to the time of the book being published, but eventually, people look into stories and find out maybe it wasn't that way. So what I did was started a newsletter that immediately followed the book, and I used the newsletter to correct anything that was found with clear intent that might have been a little off and all. And that seemed to work very well. And he had the notion to do something like that, but then the abduction bug grabbed him intensely, and he went off onto that instead of doing any more history. And being that I'm not skilled or adept at doing any kind of abduction work in this subject, I kind of separated from that. But I know Dave's gotten into some trouble over his abduction research at times, and he was a subject of scrutiny by his university. I feel bad about him for doing that, but I think probably he needed to be a little more careful about what he was doing. So, there's two Dave Jacobs. There was the historian Dave Jacobs, and then there was the abduction expert Dave Jacobs. And I can't really speak to the abduction part of it that much.
And so, I mean, was Jacobs one of those people, along with Hopkins, that was funded by Bigelow?
He may have been. I have no firsthand knowledge of that. It's possible.
Interesting. Well, I mean, it is interesting to see how these things kind of take hold and they change. And I think that Roper study was quite interesting, and Prince Hans Adam and some of these people that are kind of flitting around on the periphery, and what is their true motivation at the end of the day? Is it to take advantage of the subject? Is it to steer the narrative? Is it to make money off of things?
Yeah, I'm certain they had an agenda that was particular to their personalities, and that's what they pursued, and that usually is what overrides any other considerations in researching the subject. I think Bigelow had a notion that Roswell was going to lead to big revelations. If you look into it that intensely, he did help along by way of the Fund for UFO Research and Aldrich's Project 1947, which consequently included Roswell, as well as researching the big UFO wave. And came away with a ton of information on that, but I don't think it revealed much of anything new about Roswell. And Bigelow seemed to lose interest in the historical pursuit at that point, as far as Roswell goes. It wasn't too long after that he took an interest in abductions too, or it may have been simultaneous with his interest in abductions. But I think he had bigger sights for the information than what some of us were able to come up with doing library research. He wanted something more.
Yeah, the whole thing is fascinating when you dig into it. You dig into the ties with the military and the intelligence community and different things, and then look at the funding. And I know that, Dr. Eric Davis was just on a podcast saying that ATIP never stopped, and there's a new person in the game that he was introduced to by Bigelow, and they're still looking into things. And so this is going to be an interesting unfolding story.
I think that's likely true, because when I did Clear Intent years ago, half of the book was about the mysterious overflights of different bases along the northern tier of the U.S. And the core thinking on that for me was that this was years after Project Blue Book had closed, but yet the Air Force was clearly looking into these new UFO incidents in 75. So no matter what the government would say about UFOs when they dismissed Project Blue Book, it was like, well, that's it, we're all done. No, you can't possibly be all done, because you were still going to have unusual sightings of aerial objects over military bases, and for them to say they're not going to look into it is ridiculous.
But I mean, wouldn't it make sense that there are unusual objects over military bases when that's where they're testing things?
Well, of course. And clearly it happened in 1975, at least, that they had to investigate that. And it was such a disturbing thing that they had to declare a national alert on these stories until they could try to figure out something of what happened. Yeah, I'm not sure they ever did, because I never saw a final report on the 75 overflight incidents. There should have been something, because they publicly they wanted to present them as isolated incidents, but privately they knew that these were all kind of related. They were all within a 3-week time frame, and they were all along the same kind of geographical area, the northern tier U.S. air bases. So that would be disturbing. What's going on? If they issued a report, we haven't found it yet.
And so these were within a 3-week period, and these were the same types of objects that were being seen over a 3-week period. So
they were unknown objects, unknown helicopters, formations of lights, shooting about even shootings at air bases, mysterious characters shooting at aircraft with conventional weapons. Oddly enough, this was all within that time frame.
Okay, I think I need to look a little bit deeper into that, especially given some of the revelations about Rendlesham and so I'm gonna have to call you tomorrow.
I put as much into Clear Intent as I could on what we found on these incidents, and there were more incidents that we couldn't document simply because then we ran out of time. But even after that, we couldn't penetrate a certain layer of security that. We heard things happened at bases, but they wouldn't acknowledge these incidents publicly. We tried filing FOIA requests, and they were batted back. No records, and that's what they were saying before we found a lot of the 75 overflight things. And so were released after that. So
UFO sightings. There were people on the base shooting at unknown objects.
There were people shooting at aircraft that were on the bases. These people might have been off the base, or maybe they penetrated the base somehow. I mean, the aircraft were penetrating the bases. People might have been doing it too. At the very least, it should have been looked at as some kind of a terror activity. But I didn't even see any evidence they were looking at it in that context.
You know what? I think that you've just dropped a big, huge bombshell. And I think that's really important, especially given, like I said, some of the information that's come out about Rendlesham and different things that people were potentially subject to that were on the base. So, wow. And we've got just a couple minutes before show closes tonight. But, I mean, you've got a new project in the works, which I'm really excited about. Can you give us just a little glimpse of that?
Oh, yeah, very quickly. Recently, a friend of mine out in Chicago, who I've been staying with the last 3 seasons scanning files, she sent me a box full of tapes and slide boxes. So I looked in the box, and I noticed the slides were very odd looking. And I recognized them as stereo slides, the kind that there are two images on them and you project them and you get a 3D impression. So I didn't know where they came from, and after a little research, I found out they belonged to Alan Hynek. They were his slides, and he used a 3D camera for many, many, many years. And so one thing I wanted to do was to scan them in. I needed a digital record. I really didn't have the equipment to do it, but I found something I jury-rigged and managed to get really decent slide quality out of them. And I'm in the process of writing this up and explaining what's in these slides, but they're rather unique. They were, I thought, much too insider to be anything that the average ufologist did. They showed very strange, unusual topics, like Hector Quintanilla with a baby in his lap, another former Blue Book head, Robert Friend, on a motorbike. These weren't the common images. I never saw these before, but that's what was represented on these slides. And Hynek apparently was out with these guys and taking 3D images of them.
Oh, I cannot wait. It's huge. This is huge, Barry. And I wish we've got 30 seconds left until the end of the show, but that is big. And when you release the article and all of your research, I will make sure to get that out and to get you back on the show, because this is really important. So
yeah, I hope something comes of getting those out. I mean, I'd like to see more slides turn up, but
absolutely.
I don't know what'll happen.
I love it. Thank you for all of your work. Thank you for your friendship and your helping me throughout all of this. I want to thank my friends this evening. I appreciate your show support. Bruce Cornett, thank you for your contribution. All of you mean the world to me. Please stay safe, and I will catch you next week. And I have no doubt next week's show will be another bombshell. So take care. Stick around for Willie Miranda, and we will catch you next week.
Listen very carefully.
This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
This is UFO Classified, live every Friday night, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. The truth is out there, just waiting to be discovered.
And now, if you will, accompany me on a journey to the future.
For more information on the host of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes, upcoming guests, as well as links to the past shows,
visit her website at UFOclassified.com.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcasting